launch of the Distinguished Speaker Series of the California Academy of Bioengineering. And I'll introduce the panel. Song Lee, who's the chair at UCLA and who is the ex-director of the Bioengineering Institute. Dr. Shu Chen, and a distinguished professor at UCSD. Geert Schmidt-Schoenbein, also from UCSD. Lihong Wang, who's going to join us, who's a professor at Caltech. Bruce Chomberg, who's the current director of the NIBIB and a professor at UC Irvine. And of course, our speaker tonight, Roderic Pettigrew, who's the founding director of the NIBIB and now Dean and CEO at Texas A&M. I'm Scott Simon. I'm the director of the Bioengineering Institute of California and a professor at UC Davis. Since many of you tuning in may not be aware of exactly what the California Academy of Bioengineering is, I'll briefly outline the functions and the purpose of the speaker series tonight. Priority one for the Bioengineering Institute is to support research and creative work in bioengineering carried out across all the 10 UC campuses. And we do so by creating a coherent network for exchange of information, for the pursuit of intercampus collaboration, and also to share the resources that are relevant to the advancement of bioengineering. This effort was initiated by Shu Chen at UC San Diego about 2 decades ago. And some of the functions that the BIC does is we put on a yearly UC system-wide summer meeting and several other functions. And as of last year, we were renewed by the UC Office of the President for the next 5 years. We're a multi-campus research unit, just like the California observatories. One goal of UCOP that they advocated was to have the Bioengineering Institute build bridges between biotechnology and biopharma. And in order to pursue this, the Bioengineering Institute Steering Committee, which is made up of the 10 chairs, as well as an industry representative, who's Walt Baxter at Medtronic. What we did was we invited each of the National Academy members who practice in California to accept membership in this California Academy. And even though this was during COVID, we had something like 80% acceptance rate and a lot of enthusiasm for this endeavor. Now, the first activity that an executive subcommittee that was formed was to nominate 6 distinguished speakers for this series. And you could see that they represent a diverse group of leaders in our field, and some of the next speakers are actually shown there. What we asked these speakers to do is to deliver presentations centered on the future trends in bioengineering and its benefits to society. I'll end my remarks now, and I'll thank the California Academy Subcommittee, co-chaired by myself and Geert Schmidt-Schoenbein, and also assisted by Kathy Farrar from Stanford, Lihong Wang from Caltech, Ellis Meng from USC, Vic Rogers from UC Riverside, and Fiona Black from Illumina. So you can see that we have a wide variety of industry, private, academic, and also public academics that are that made up the subcommittee for this speaker series. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Shu Chen, who will introduce the speaker tonight. I think you're muted, Shu.
Yeah. Am I unmuted? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Scott. It's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce our inaugural speaker, Dr. Roderic Pettigrew. After graduating from Morehouse College, Dr. Pettigrew received his PhD from MIT, MD from University of Miami, and clinical training at University of California, San Diego. He had an illustrious career at Emory University with outstanding work on 4D MR imaging of the cardiovascular system. In 2002, Dr. Pettigrew was appointed as the founding director of the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, NIBIB, at the NIH after a national search. In his 15 years of superb directorship, Dr. Pettigrew led innovative research and its translation nationwide with convergence of life sciences, physical sciences, and engineering. He provided visionary leadership in science and engineering, promoted technological developments, created effective collaborations among industries, government, and universities, and achieved remarkable international cooperation. He established many innovative initiatives in research and training, such as the Quantum Projects and the Trailblazer Award. Dr. Pettigrew's superb contributions at NIBIB have left an everlasting impact on bioengineering and biomedical imaging in the United States and beyond. In 2017, Dr. Pettigrew was recruited to Texas A&M University and Houston Methodist Hospital as CEO of Engineering Health. Robert Welsh, Professor of Medicine and Executive Dean for MMed Intercollegiate School of Engineering Medicine, that educate a new breed of engineering-minded physicians to solve healthcare problems. In his new role, Dr. Pettigrew has made tremendous contributions to education, research, and translation by integrating engineering and medicine. In recognition of his outstanding accomplishments, Dr. Pettigrew has received numerous awards and honors. He has been elected to the National Academy of Medicine, National Academy of Engineering, and National Academy of Inventors, as well as a foreign member of the National Academy of Sciences in India. We are most fortunate to have Dr. Pettigrew giving the inaugural distinguished speech on engineering medicine for a global society for the California Academy of Bioengineering. Let us give Dr. Pettigrew our warmest welcome. Dr. Pettigrew.
Thank you, Shu. How's my audio, Scott?
I can hear you fine.
Okay. There was a little bit of an echo on my end previously.
Yeah, that might have been on Shu's end, but why don't we toggle you up to the...
I will unmute.
Okay, but you can hear me well.
Perfect, no echo.
Okay, no echo.
So
let me, first of all, thank the Academy for this distinctive honor of being asked to be a speaker in this series of distinguished speakers, and to have the honor of being the inaugural speaker, and to have been introduced by my dear friend and super special mentor, Shu Chen. I have to tell you, Shu is more than a mentor. I had the privilege of attending the ceremony when he was awarded the National Medal of Science in Washington. And I was there with his family. And all of his family members, his multiple beautiful granddaughters, all referred to him with such reverence and adoration, using the term Papa. They said, "Dear Papa." And from that day forward, I consider Shu Chen also my Papa. In fact, he's a Papa to all of us. And all of us who know him know that's true. That's just not an exaggeration. Shu Chen is a Papa to all of us and to the whole field of bioengineering. So I just could not be more honored to be able to participate in this event and to be introduced by our Papa, Shu Chen. So thank you so much. And I also have to tell you, and since I see Bruce there, is that when NIBIB had its 10th anniversary, I think, in 2012. During this similar event, where the California Institute of Bioengineering was having your annual gathering, that exactly coincided with the dates of our celebration of the 10th anniversary of NIBIB. And so I emailed Shu and asked him, not knowing that, if he would be kind enough to deliver the closing remarks. And he said, well, this is the same time that we're having our University of California system-wide meeting for bioengineering, but I will be there. He said, I'm the chair of the meeting. I'm going to open the meeting. I'll take a red eye, fly from California to Washington on the red eye, be there in time the next morning to close the meeting, or afternoon, close the meeting. Then I'll fly back to California and close that meeting. And he did it. Unbelievable. So just so delighted, so memorable. I am going to share my screen now and bring up my slides. Okay. Minimize my gallery and make sure that I'm sharing the sound also. And then hide the floating meeting controls, bring up my first slide. And Scott, just a visual check with you to make sure everything is coming across.
Yes, sir. I see it loud and clear.
Okay. So the title of this presentation is as advertised and as Shu indicated, looking at how we as bioengineers can make a difference in the delivery of improved health to everybody on this planet. So the title is Engineering Medicine for a Global Society. The World Economic Forum that meets every year at the beginning of the year in Davos, this year had as one of its themes the future of health and healthcare. And in that theme, they identified, and it will come as no surprise to any of us, the need for the global healthcare system to undergo a major transformation. That has really been brought into quite dramatic relief with the pandemic these last 2 years, as we well know, but with a focus on disease prevention and health promotion that is maintaining health for the entirety of our lives with the goal of living better lives, that is healthier lives, and longer. So health and longevity, and those two terms will come up again later, as will the goal of transformation. Taking a little deeper look at this issue, the needs in Kenya, as an example, are illustrated here. Some of them surprised me and some didn't. So I was recently involved in a bioengineering summit in Kenya a few weeks ago. And the need for vaccines against malaria and COVID were not surprising, but also measles now. And the one that did surprise me is this polio outbreak in 13 countries. About a decade ago, Bill Gates visited the NIH, and he was so proud that the Gates Foundation had made substantial gains in eradicating polio, reporting at that time that there were only 2 countries that still had polio. So I was surprised to find now that this is now surged in 13 countries. So a need for transformation is certainly there. And then looking at this e-magazine called African Renewal, at some of the challenges in Africa. Health care services delivered to remote areas. We have that challenge in the US, but even to a greater degree in other countries in underserved settings. The arrival I was delighted to see of portable ultrasound, particularly this one, Bruce, was a result of an NIBIB initiative and award to General Electric. This is a GE V-scan. And mental illness, of course, is prevalent everywhere and has become much more recognized than when I was in medical school and doing my training at UC San Diego. So the need for transformation is clear. The focus on prevention is logical and smart, but we're particularly keying in on health and longevity. This concept of transformation is, of course, not a new one. Every generation talks about being transformative, and every generation talks about innovation. And there's a good reason for that, because they are unending. There is no limit to being innovative, and there's no limit to transformation. But this was a book that presented a different view almost 25 years ago, called Pasteur's Quadrant. Many of you no doubt are familiar with this, and it talked about work along a couple of axes. Work that was pure basic, typified by Niels Bohr and his model of the atom, as we all know, and work that really wasn't pursuing new fundamental understanding of the laws of nature, but rather to use those and to invent devices that could be used, and those are typified by Thomas Edison and his invention of a light bulb. But Stokes posited that the real innovation and transformation occurs in this quadrant typified by Louis Pasteur, where there's an intersection between discovery and invention. As was the case with Pasteur, who initially worked as a microbiologist studying infection, and that eventually led to his development of the vaccines. Those did not occur at the same time, but I think a point here is that the concepts did occur in the same brain. And that, I think, is a key point. Going forward, I and one of my colleagues at Houston Methodist, John Cook, have been talking about this and talking about how Pasteur's Quadrant really should be reimagined, that transformations occur over time, and that the modern approach is one in which we really don't work in these isolated boxes or quadrants. There is crosstalk among them, that we have teams now where we not only work on discovery, but also on invention to use that discovery to solve problems. And that this concept of a single person that does use-inspired invention, while to be lauded and pursued, and we're actually doing that in our new school, we also have to realize the great value in each of these other quadrants. And in this modern era, how this is really a dynamic process where discovery leads to invention, and invention leads to new discovery, and the new discovery leads to new invention, and eventually that being applied to problems and problem solving. So we need to think of this past year's quadrant from 25 years ago in a more dynamic nature, as I've tried to illustrate here. The concept of healthy longevity has really been embraced by the National Academy of Medicine, creating a 5 to 7 year prize competition called Healthy Longevity that's tiered. And it's in 3 tiers. And the first tier is to issue seed grants called Catalyst Awards. And these Catalyst Awards, approximately 25 of them issued last year and again this year in the US, in collaboration with 30 other countries doing similar types of awards. A total of 130 awards issued each of the last 2 years, these seed grants, to challenge groups to develop innovations that would deliver health and longevity. And in fact, the first year, about a little over a year ago, when the first 25 or so awards were announced, or 23 I think it was, about a third of them involved technology and engineering integrated into their proposed projects that illustrate this idea of this convergence of those individuals who work across these pure science and pure invention quadrants. And you can see here some of the things that are highlighted: continuous dialysis, nanocatalysis, and for the students who may be listening, nanocatalytics refer to nanometallics, which when metabolized actually catalyze chemical reactions. And these have not been explored in the past for advancing health, but they could do this. And some other things here that are pretty straightforward and obvious, but one that I'm particularly fond of is this idea of an avatar of your younger self and how this might change your social behavior and social dynamics if you had this avatar of your younger self, which in turn could even change your level of health and well-being. An interesting and different concept. And this past year, I was co-chair of the selection committee for these awards, and as such, along with Victor Zhao, who's the president of the National Academy of Medicine, announced the U.S. awards. And once again, about a third of those awards also involved integration of engineering. Again, highlighted some of the things that you can see here. Automatically refocusing glasses, which change the focal length of a lens based on your gaze and where you were looking. This concept of turning your movements into sound, using systems in your home and entertainment systems and music systems in your home, along with sensors that detect your body movements and analyze those to indicate whether or not you're moving in your normal, healthy manner, or does your rate of motion, acceleration, body change, posture, time you spend in a given room, for example, in a location, if those are indicative of something is wrong, and using music to indicate that. An interesting concept. The dynamic signature of blood pressure based on cuffless blood pressure project that we started, a decade ago at NIBIB, as Bruce knows. And here's a concept that I like. We know that light can stimulate neurotransmitters. So repurposing the light bulb to emit light at specific frequencies that would stimulate serotonin, for example, that would improve your mood and health and well-being. These are some interesting concepts that involve technological innovation, converge with medicine and its goal of healthy longevity. So that is a bit of a backdrop to illustrate the view that I was advancing in this commentary that I wrote about a year ago when we were smack in the middle of the first wave of COVID. The title published by the National Academy of Medicine of this opinion piece was engineering better medicine for public health crises in the future. And in this, I posited that we needed a deeper integration of clinicians and engineers to meet these challenges. And this deeper integration would include medicine, sociology, because we really haven't in the past considered the sociological aspects, behavioral and social sciences, to the degree that we should. You know, we've been focused on invention and innovation, on the what is what I call it, but we also need to consider the individuals to whom this would be applied, where they are, and how it might be applied. And this I call convergence engineering, so that innovations would be designed with accessibility, ease of use, social application in mind, and particularly targeted to redress the socially based inequities that have been so dramatically illustrated by COVID. So indeed, now we're in the throes of these compounded crises initiated by the medical crisis, which resulted in this dramatic economic crisis that we're still struggling with, and unveiling what has been a long-standing social crisis, but brought into stark relief with people of color being infected 4 to 5 times those of majority populations, and with death rates around 3 times those of majority populations. So this has led to a report by the Office of Science and Technology Policy on pandemic preparedness and how we can be better prepared for future pandemics. And now, I think this was done before the Omicron variant, but we appreciate that these variants will continue to emerge, particularly as long as we don't have herd immunity and wider spread of vaccination. But here's some of the key things that are identified and reported in this report. We need to transform medical defenses, and this idea of having vaccines made quickly, rapidly against any virus, this pan-virus, this needs immunoengineering. Therapeutics before the pandemic, additional approaches to attacking viruses, also requiring immunoengineering, and simple and inexpensive diagnostics. The kinds of things that NIBIB was working on in the first pandemic under Bruce's direction. And situational awareness. So we need early warning systems and real-time monitoring systems. And there's been advances in that I'll refer to. Prioritizing vulnerable communities. As engineers, we're accustomed to designing systems to work and address boundary conditions, to work within boundary conditions. That can and should be a focus of our work going forward. The kinds of things I talked about, realizing who this will go to, where they live, how it's going to reach them. Is there connectivity? Can we make use of that connectivity? Give us feedback and information so that we know what people need, how they're doing. Those kinds of things could be built into the systems of tomorrow. The cost effectiveness, availability, reusability, or design parameters could be included in those goals achieved. So I like this last recommendation from this report. Manage the mission with the focus and the governance that was used to successfully take a man to the moon, land him, and return him to Earth, as was done, many, many decades ago now. The Apollo program, in conjunction with the international scientific community. And this to me says a holistic approach where you consider everything from beginning to end. And that, again, is a role for engineering. So I add my additional goals to this overarching report of an explicit focus on underserved communities needs to be included. And we also need to think of engineers as part of the holistic response team, that there needs to be a system approach. Again, going back to the way the Apollo program was managed. So that when the hospital CEO sits down and gets his infectious disease expert and his head of intensive care and the chief of a nursing operation are all sitting around the table, I would submit you should also have an engineer at that table to have this systems approach. This team approach is very much evident if you, and as we all no doubt have, read the history of how we successfully, as a scientific and engineering society, developed these multiple COVID vaccines. This report from the New York Times a couple of months ago, focusing on Katie Carrico and her colleague Weissman, but outlining the various steps. And those various steps indicate the necessity for a team effort and for advances in multiple disciplines. These individuals demonstrated that you could instruct cells to make part of a virus using mRNA. That was the first step, but not the only step. We needed some way to package the mRNA and deliver it. So the work of Peter Cullis and his colleagues at the University of British Columbia, and I've spoken with Peter, he gives a fascinating story of his work and how he developed this lipid nanoparticle to be ionizable so that it was responsive to the pH of the system. Outside of the cell, it was intact. Once entering, docking in the cell, entering the cell, the pH caused it to open up and release the mRNA. It took a while to develop that. And then Barney Graham and Jason McKellen, Barney at the NIH, and the Infectious Disease Institute, discovered a way to make the spike protein stable so that you could elicit a strong immunoresponse to it. A specific mutation in the protein makes the protein stable. This team effort led to the successful development of the vaccine. So this speaks to immunoengineering. This particular article, written 2 years before the pandemic, describes it in those terms, talks about technology innovation, engineering of the RNA sequence, of mRNA engineering for a new era of vaccinology long before COVID had come on the scene, recognizing the interplay of these disciplines. And now going forward, thinking of the challenges ahead of having a universal vaccine, as Tony Fauci describes it, and described it long before COVID. He would talk about our need to have a universal vaccine, now being referred to as a pan vaccine. But this work developing antibodies that target multiple sites on the target protein, not relying on a single site, and having that as potentially having a broad applicability for variants to come. And additional ancillary alternative nanotechnologies with ways to fight the viral particle. Here, this artist's rendition of a DNA construct here that has the ability to fold, but has within it the receptors for the viral particle, the COVID receptors in it, and it attracts it into this open space here, folds over the viral particle, or is folded, and is folded over the viral particle, and it prevents it from entering the cell. This type of construct underdeveloped, and others where the polymers that simulate the membrane to which the viral particle would like to attach, but after it's attached, delivers a therapeutic blow. So now, with the surge of COVID again, and the advent of additional variants and the breakthrough infections that all of us are seeing, we once again have the concern about vaccines and also wearing masks. And indeed, no doubt, all of us at times wear masks. I just returned from a meeting where masks were were the order of the day. So before I could get back into my house and I returned home, somebody in my house gave me strong instructions to come in the house with a home COVID test myself and make sure I wasn't infected before I went throughout the rest of the house. So I was happy to be able to find a home COVID test at CVS and to do that. But here's an interesting smart mass COVID concept from Jim Collins, who we all know at the Wyss Institute in Boston, and developing a mask that not only prevents you from spreading a virus and potentially to some degree a virus from being spread to you, but also can report whether or not you have the viral particle. It has these multiple stages. It uses CRISPR to identify the target RNA of the viral particle. It lyses it, it amplifies it, and it uses CRISPR to identify it and detect it, along with a reporter molecule, which is lysed by not Cas9, but Cas13, and Cas13 being more effective with RNA. And when the COVID particle is present, the lysis of it and the release of this reporter molecule is then captured by an antibody on a specific location on the mask, and you get a positive result. So a neat idea, recently reported this summer in Nature Biotechnology. So again, sort of illustrating what we as engineers can do to further advance our abilities to help combat the pandemic. Also along those lines, we're reporting now the wearable sensor data that many of us get routinely. I'm also wearing my Apple Watch and an Oura Ring, for example, observing that analysis of this data is effective in identifying that you likely have an infection days before you are completely aware of it. This was done retrospectively, and now in this prospective study, recently reported from the group at Stanford, Snyder and his colleagues, looking largely at heart rate data, to some degree, I think, step data, but also done prospectively. It shows that in 80% of individuals who went on to develop COVID, they were able to predict it 3 days in advance with this system. So those kinds of advances are with us. And we're still working to achieve what has been described to me as a great white whale, so to speak, of developing a system that unobtrusively, without a blood pressure cuff, is able to detect blood pressure and report it to you and have you be knowledgeable about your blood pressure in a quantitative fashion because of these two observations here that have been reported now widely in the literature, how critical it is to know and to manage your blood pressure. That every 10 millimeters of elevated systolic blood pressure reduction decreases the risk of a major cardiovascular event by 20%. 10% drop in elevated systolic blood pressure, 20% drop in a major subsequent cardiovascular event. And that the risk of death doubles every time your systolic blood pressure goes up by 20 millimeters or the diastolic pressure goes up by 10 millimeters, your risk of death from a heart attack or stroke doubles. So that underscores the need to know these numbers because this is so preventable. We know how to prevent these kinds of events. We know how to lower heart blood pressure if you simply know that you have it elevated. So there are a number of watches I've found now on the internet that claim that they measure blood pressure. I doubt that seriously. I can't say that scientifically, but I know that it is a challenge. Most of them use optical sensors And while those can give you some degree of a waveform, here's an approach by my colleague Ruth Jafari, who was also an NIBIB grantee in our initiative that we issued jointly with India, about a decade ago to try and develop cuffless technologies. And here, Rusbe is using bioimpedance to effectively image the arterial pulse wave with this BioZ beetle, he calls it, with each of these sensors here, of being able to detect an image across the wrist and identify an arterial pulse wave, and from that extract indices of diastolic blood pressure and systolic blood pressure that correlate quite well with conventional measures of diastolic and systolic blood pressure. That on the horizon. And also now pointing to the growth of point-of-care technologies and devices, leveraging POCTERN, which was our name for the Point-of-Care Technologies Research Network that we started about 14 years ago at NIBIB. Tiffany Lash is the director of this par excellence, and she and Bruce and Francis now created this Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics Initiative, RADX, that we're all familiar with, that's been so effective with this fast track program for developing and distributing technologies that would allow us to test for COVID widely. Millions of those produced, some of them home of care collection kits, like the one shown here that uses a quantum dot as a sensor that you can pick up at your local CVS. This courtesy of NIBIB, and Bruce, we're so thankful for this. And I got one of these, and this is what allowed me to enter my house, a few days ago when it was negative. So one of the other innovations that we have been hopeful for, that I've been hopeful for, based on developments dating back a half a decade ago now, is being able to vaccinate yourself at home. So we have these home home COVID tests. What about a home vaccination system? So Mark Prosnitz, a bioengineer at Georgia Tech, developed these biodegradable macroneedles. It's a patch of about 100 or so biodegradable polymers loaded with a solid version of a vaccine, which they tested in a phase 1 trial. It was quite successful while I was still at NIBIB. I think it was around 2016 or so. I left in 2017. And we reported this as a substantial advance. And when I arrived at Texas A&M, I talked about advancing this kind of technology even further, but more importantly, as an exemplar of the kind of individual we should train going forward, who develops these use-inspired innovations to solve problems and to be transformative. And I'd like to share this video that speaks to this and speaks to what we are trying to do in our new Intercollegiate School of Engineering Medicine. Imagine that one day you could go to your mailbox and in the mail you get a Band-Aid, and essentially take this Band-Aid in the house from your doctor, place it on your arm, and you're vaccinated. Vaccinated against the flu, so you got your flu shot for the season, or vaccinated against a dreaded virus, or vaccinated against cancer. That kind of innovation occurred between the merger of immunology from the biologist and materials engineering from the engineer. These two people coming together to solve this unmet need. So in EnMed, we're going to train physicians to think like that. We will train physicians to see a medical process such as we really have difficulty in vaccinating the nation. Wouldn't it be great if everybody could vaccinate themselves? Wouldn't it be great if you could go to the drugstore and pick up your vaccine? So that sort of thinking, that sort of transformational thinking is what NMED is all about. Well, Scott, I hope the sound came through. Okay. All right. So, as is not surprisingly, I'm sort of running out of time, so I'm going to go into hyperdrive now. But one of the problems that has existed in the medical arena, and you know, Shu knows this, and Atul Bhute, if he's in the audience, has a marvelous illustration of how sepsis is the most common pathway leading to death in the hospital. And we need a better way of identifying infection and preventing it from progressing to the point of severe sepsis and septic shock. And identifying these various stages. This SIRS, which stands for Systemic Inflammatory Response Syndrome, where the immune system is actually trying to kill the invading infectious agent, the bacteria. And this is CARS, for Compensatory Anti-Inflammatory Response Syndrome, where the body goes into a greater salvage mode. It's trying to salvage the organs, and then organs begin to progressively shut down. It's really trying to maintain homeostasis. When it becomes very severe, the organs shut down and just sort of preserve neural function and cardiac function are preserved, but other organs shut down. So we need technologies that would allow us to identify and characterize or stratify, as Rashid Bashir and his colleagues have been working on this problem, describes it. Developing a point-of-care device like the one illustrated here that use sort of these culture-counter types of principles, merged with these immuno-labeled, immuno-captured posts that, as a result, are able to identify not only different cells, white cells, red blood cells, but proteins as well, and markers of the inflammatory system in one blood sample, in one setting, and train this convolved with artificial intelligence techniques, which look at this complex of cells and proteins correlated with the stage of infection, the type of infection, to inform the user that this individual is infected, is in an SRI stage, or is progressing to a CARS stage, or headed towards system shutdown. All of that would be very informative, and that work is in progress. Here's another innovation from Philip Lowe at Purdue, who has spent the last decade or more in trying to develop a theranostic, I call it, specific for prostate cancer, a molecule that would not only image that there is cancer there based on specifically targeting PMSA, prostate-specific membrane antigen, but then labeling it with a therapeutic radionuclide to also treat it. And they've been able to demonstrate that you can identify this particular antigen in patients with prostate cancer, including metastases. You can see this individual with bone mets. And with a level of success that has resulted in this being awarded breakthrough status by the FDA, which means that they will accelerate it through the review process, give guidance, and it's being purchased, just has been purchased now by Novartis via, with a rather handsome amount, I should say, as you can see here, of the purchase price. With this particular molecule, and by the way, you know, this was designed knowing the cleft in this PSMA molecule, a protein, knowing the size of the gap, developing a protein-specific molecule that would dock in this gap because it was created to conform in size and shape to the opening here. The proverbial key in the lock was the concept being explored. And that has been successful. And this shows a patient with extensive metastatic disease throughout the skeleton, having prostate highlighted in red here. The uptake in the kidneys is normal. And here is a patient after being treated with lutetium-177. Lutetium-177 is a beta emitter. And then we have this concept from Kobayashi at the NIH and NCI, this idea of labeling an antibody against a cancer cell with this molecule which has a high absorption coefficient for a specific near-infrared light wavelength at 690 nanometers. And after absorbing this, it actually heats it, and that then destroys the cancer cell. After destroying the cancer cell, that's part of the good news, that you have this delivered immunotherapy, but releasing the tumor antigens as a result of the cell swelling and dying. These antigens eliciting an immune response, educating the T cells to attack any residual cancer cells, and also, at least in theory, developing memory T cells so that you become vaccinated. So with the last few minutes, and I will stop at 8:30, this is my one summary slide of what we are about in our new initiative at the Intercollegiate School of Engineering Medicine, EnMed. Here's a basic concept, and you all get it. So you look at this and you see what we're trying to do. We're trying to integrate these two traditionally distinct disciplines to create a new kind of individual that has not purposefully been trained before. And this new person we call a physicianeer. This represents a drop of knowledge, as I would posit, in the brain of this individual, who is a scientific bilingual, who understands the natural interplay between engineering and biology, and uses that for a better understanding of how physiology and health work, and therefore a better understanding of disease. And from that would spring these improved ideas about how to problem solve. That's our goal. So that these individuals would be equipped with the intellectual tools and the skills to meet the challenges around the globe and deliver this concept of healthcare in this global society. Here is our inaugural class of physicianeers mixed in with some other additional engineering students during an event which amounts to a 48-hour invent-a-thon, I would call it, called Aggie's Invent. The students are handed a list of problems. They form teams. They start on Friday evening. They return on Sunday with invented solutions or prototypes of solutions to these problems, and they display them, and then they're judged, and they can earn prizes. You can watch this Aggie's Invent on YouTube. It's quite amazing. Here are several of our students in the inaugural class, and you can see them at work. And while the students are really focused on learning medicine and engineering in a blended fashion, they earn 2 degrees in 4 years, a master's and an MD in 4 years. In the first class, just after the first year, had several intellectual property disclosures as indicated there. And the very final thing I want to do is to give a bit of a shout out to the extraordinary intramural researcher at NIBIB, who I think has this kind of brain where he himself describes as being at home with biology and invention. And indeed, that is the case. Harry Schroff. I used to call him a wunderkind, now I just call him Wunder because he's over 30. Used to be under 30. But Harry has developed his own unique approach to light sheet microscopy. He was a student of Eric Betsick and has developed now, as just reported just a week or so ago, this multi-view confocal super resolution microscope with this goal of this daunting task. He says he's really fascinated by the C. elegans, a worm. He thinks, I think I'm really just addicted to this. But he has this idea of reconstructing the development trajectory of every cell in the embryo, how it develops from twitch to hatch, as he calls it. And his initial dual inversion microscope, he said, didn't have the imaging resolution that was sufficient to do this, not to plot the trajectory of each cell. You can see this is an embryo of a C. elegans. You know how tiny a C. elegans is. It's like the end of the tip of a pencil. But you can see this embryo, the worm in the embryo sac, as it has developed. What he wanted to do was be able to see individual cells. So he's added a third camera along with artificial intelligence and deep learning. You can see the improvement shown here at the bottom, the ability to resolve mitochondria and lysosomes and the motion here in a cancer cell. This is amazing to see this interplay between the mitochondria and lysosomes of the embryo with this kind of super resolution tomography and its ability to image this whole worm in a second. And so with repeated images, he's now gotten the ability to actually be able to identify every cell in the C. elegans worm, where it's located, as shown here. Just amazing. And the final thing to show here, this is 6 or so years old now, but equally amazing, still amazing, is within the embryo of a C. elegans, the development of a neuron. The gestational period for these worms is about 15 hours. This was a movie taken over that amount of time. This is at 5 hours and 14 seconds, and I'm going to stop it right there because now you see the development of this neuron, and it looks like a lobster. Kind of has these tails and these arms. If you look at the whole movie, the lobster, the neuron starts to rotate and tries to sniff out its connections. So that is where we're headed, and our future goal is to be able to image the world that occurs within cell. The DNA of a nucleus is shown here. This is a dynamic process. So this goal of a 4D nucleome is where we headed and map it out. This would drive theory, and from the theory build a model, and from models become solutions to problems and challenges. That is where we're headed in the future. So I leave you with this paraphrase from philosopher John Dewey. If we think today as we thought yesterday, we will rob ourselves of tomorrow. Thank you so much for this kind invitation. Thank you for your wonderful introduction. Shu, it's a wonderful chance to see you again, and thank you all. And I look forward to any chat that we may have time for.
That was wonderful, Rod. Thanks so much. Song Lee is going to handle the Q&A. Thank you so much for that inspirational lecture, and you certainly gave us a real sense of where bioengineering is headed and where the trajectory is strong to go. Song, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. First, I want to thank Dr. Pettigrew for this wonderful and inspiring seminar on biotechnologies in bioengineering approaches for diagnosis in therapy. At first, I would like to invite Dr. Bruce Chomberg, the current director of NIBIB, to ask the first question and make some comments.
Thank you, Song, and thank you, Scott, and Rod, thank you for a spectacular lecture. It was wonderful to see, and I think you just made so many important points. Thanks also for the very beautiful and personal introduction about Shu. Some stories that we have heard and some we haven't, and we all look to Shu. And with the two of you, we have really such a wonderful connection to really the beginning and the growth of bioengineering across the United States, across the world. And you two have brought so many people into the field. Rod, you brought me onto your council, and look what happened to me. So thank you for that.
Got you in trouble.
You got me in big trouble. So my question is, you've really presided over a golden era of expansion with the hard work from Shu and many colleagues all around the country to position the NIH against much objection at the time, as you recall, to actually form an institute. And we've seen more than a 5-fold increase in departments of bioengineering all around the country. We've seen a spectacular growth in students and faculty, and this enormous creative power and potential, which is being converted, as you've pointed out, in many, many areas. But throughout your talk, you underscored the need to have more of our people in hospitals, in medical centers, in policy and politics, in critical areas where they can make decisions and contribute. Because as I've seen over the past 20 months, this is actually a real crisis. We're noticeably absent in these positions. So now you are growing NMed, and there are 2 schools of medicine in the country that have engineering as a fundamental or foundational curriculum. Do you see this as the next major growth phase? I think there are about 150 or so schools of medicine. We've had enormous growth at the undergrad level and the graduate level. What are the opportunities to double, quadruple, 10-fold increase? Because we've seen, no matter how we cut it, the bioengineers have a small market share at the NIH, dominated really by more traditional medicine. And although we are attempting to help change ways of thinking and doing that by action, what about getting more people? And what will be the roles of medical schools like you are developing in this type of transformation in the coming years?
Well, Bruce, you give me an opportunity to actually reiterate some of the points that I made. And you're actually right that up until the present time, the seat at the table has not been commensurate with the value that is there and the value that we bring. Somewhat ironically, maybe, a part of one of the silver linings in the COVID cloud, as I have phrased it, is a growth of appreciation of the need for and the value of converging, and converging inclusive of engineering. There has been an effort, as all of us know, to bring this to the fore. It started, in part with Shu, with his Institute for Engineering Medicine at UC San Diego. And I've seen other institutes like that pop up. There's Institute of Engineering Medicine in Minnesota. And now Columbia has what they call their rock stars of engineering medicine, or stars of engineering medicine, I think is what they are calling it. And about 2 or 3 months ago, I spoke with the president of RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, Shirley Jackson, and she was so pleased to tell me that they had signed an agreement with the Icahn School of Medicine in Mount Sinai in New York. And they are now partnering, I think, all recognizing not only the value that we bring, but the need that's there. We really, your comment pointed to that. We really need, it's not just a luxury, it's a need. If you look at the challenges that we face worldwide, even this idea, and I credit Victor Zhao for coming up with this term of healthy longevity. That was a term he came up with. When he first mentioned it to me, when those words came out of his mouth and he started to try to explain it, I said, you don't have to explain. I got it right away. You know, healthy longevity. That just sums it up. That's what we're all about. And he said, well, we need to involve more. I said, absolutely. You, not only do you want to, you need to. It's the only way that we can get where we would like to be from where we are now is through technological innovation. If you can consider the daunting challenges that we have of the masses of people that are without, and despite all these fantastic advances that we have, they just aren't everywhere. And the virus is driving home the point. If we don't look at our challenges globally and have this global view and perspective, we're always going to be challenged repeatedly. So I don't see a way to get to where we need to be without what we do and what we bring to the table. And I think all of us have to make that case. It's an easy case to make now, much easier than it was, I think, before COVID. But there are some obvious things that need to happen, such as thinking of engineers as a part of the team, particularly when medicine is concerned. And and that's what I mean. I think when the hospitals sit down with statisticians and approaches to solving healthcare problems, they need to have an engineer at the table. That's the way to get to it. Now, in our own situation, there are many clinicians at Houston Methodist that get it, that support it. Actually, when I arrived here, they were like, whoa, we're so glad to see you. You know, we can't wait. And I sat down with the head of the DeBakey Heart and Vascular Center, Alan Lumsden, and I said, Alan, I want you to think about this, and maybe you can send a note and tell me what your 3 major problems are that where we might be able to help. He goes, I don't have to think about it. I can tell you right now. Here's 1, 2, 3. These 3 problems where I could use your help with right now. I won't go through them. It'd be a bit too technical. Well, one of them I'll tell you. TAVR is one of them. It's this new approach to aortic valve replacement. And one of the problems is it replaces a surgical procedure with a minimally invasive, but it flicks off calcific deposits, and you get these microemboli. You just shower microemboli in the brain. Because I need to solve that. I cured one problem and created another one. So I think there are those in the medical space who appreciate the value that we bring. In terms of the schools, I can imagine schools growing. So the sepsis work that I talked about, that's Rashid Bashir. He is the vice dean of the Carl, Illinois School of Engineering Medicine, which predated NIBIB by 1 year. I talked to him today, actually. He told me they're going to graduate their first class, at the end of this year. We'll graduate our first class at the end of next year. There are some differences. Our graduates emerge with 2 degrees in 4 years. And we're the only school that does that, but the basic concept is the same, bringing engineering and medicine together, aimed at problem solving. And no doubt there will be schools to come. I will tell you that I am planning, Bruce, and maybe all of you can assist in this, in creating a new professional society, the International Society of Engineering Medicine, along with Carl, Illinois, is a co-contributor and co-planner, and a similar program at Vanderbilt, but also different. They target MDs, but the Medical Innovators Development Program. They focus on engineering and using engineering to problem solve. To enter their program, you have to have a PhD in engineering or technology, a technical background. as another institution that would participate in this. But I'm hopeful that this will galvanize a worldwide effort to do just what you talked about. Boy, was that a long answer.
Great, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to invite the panelists to make sure comments and ask questions, and then I get to the questions in the
no more
Q&A.
answers from me. They're too long. I think I've answered every question in one answer.
Yeah,
Rich in information content.
Yeah. Okay, so
Leon.
Dr. Gert Schmidt-Schomberg from UCSD will be the next, please.
Well, let me just make one more comment.
Okay.
Leon, my talk was so long, so we all know Leon, but he sent me this beautiful example of photoacoustic tomography and how he's able to image functional regions in the brain with the same level of specificity as 7T fMRI, which is the gold standard. Amazing. But I had so much stuff to show Leon, I just couldn't include that. And when I saw you, I thought, well, he's going to present it. So I let the original author present it at some future point.
Thank you, Rod.
Yeah, good, please.
Rod, thank you for this absolutely marvelous presentation. I want to just pick up on some of your last points you made. When are we going to have the first session in a biomedical engineering meeting that presents grateful patients by engineers and their physicians?
Well, Bruce knows this, and shoot, we could do that now. I've never thought of that. But we could do that right now. I think there are many patients. In fact, we have had patients. I can think of 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah.
I think of a young lady who was in college, straight A student, star on a volleyball team, and had, fortunately for her, a benign brain tumor that was removed in such a way that she was able to return her studies in volleyball, but aided by image-guided intervention, and did not have any neurological deficit, despite having this golf ball-sized tumor. And that just would not have happened without the kind of work that we do. The first patient to have recovered voluntary motion after 5 years of complete motor paralysis following a cervical spine injury, Rob Summers, actually came to our 10th anniversary celebration and spoke about his journey, how he became paralyzed. He was a baseball star in college in Utah, had an accident in the driveway of his own home. A car hit him, fractured his cervical spine. He was a quadriplegic afterwards. He said he could move one finger. And now he's able to stand on his own for about an hour. He regained bladder, bowel, and sexual function and has some voluntary movement of his lower extremities. And we've had other patients like that. So that all emerged from work that was supported by it. So there are those around, but I think it would be a great idea to have more patients like that at these kinds of meetings.
Yeah.
I'd like to invite Dr. Li-Hong Wang from Caltech to ask a question and make comments.
Thank you, Sung. Thank you, Rod, for the inspirational talk. I was particularly amazed by the posterior quadrant. I guess I was ignorant enough. It's my first time seeing this quadrant. You show this double axes, right? The horizontal axis is the consideration for use, and the vertical one is for quest for fundamental understanding.
Fundamental
So,
understanding.
yeah, this is you give really good three examples, right? Bohr, does fundamental research with not much consideration for immediate use. Then you got Edison on the other extreme, right? So very applied, highly useful. And then you got Pasteur himself, right? So I presume he invented this quadrant, right?
No,
Named
this
after him.
was, yeah, so Leon, the Pasteur's quadrant concept was really posited and put forward by the author of that book. You probably
Okay.
couldn't tell that was actually a book
All right.
called Pasteur's Quadrant that was written in 1997 by Donald Stokes. You can
Right.
easily find it. It's
Right.
all over the internet now.
Right. I mean, that's amazing, right? So that his type of research is the best type of basic research, right? So
Yes.
what got me to think more is you got a blank quadrant there, which is a diagonal quadrant from Pasteur's quadrant, right? So that means it's not very fundamental and not terribly useful. I mean, what advice would you give to maybe our students how to avoid that quadrant in their selection of research topics? Sometimes, in my own experience, I feel like sometimes I actually have to discuss with my own lab members. I say, well, like, when we pick topics, right, we got to be careful. It should be either fundamental or useful. And now I have to say, or maybe both, given this plot. And I guess, when I look at this as a depending on where we draw the origin, where we define the origin, so it could be useless or even negatively useful, right? So.
Well, so this is interesting, Lee Hong. Actually, one of my colleagues at Methodist, John Cook, who is a cardiologist that is a basic scientist, but also does applied work as well. He actually developed the first hospital-based laboratory to manufacture hospital-grade mRNA and has been doing that for several years now, sort of pre-COVID. But we've had this discussion. The question you're asking now, he and I have had this discussion about this blank quadrant. And his idea was that if you consider these axes as a continuum, one, on the vertical axis, discovery, and on the horizontal axis, invention or application, and you look at it as a continuum, there's actually also value in that quadrant too, because it gives you a start. You kind of start there. And then just recently, he came back with an idea. He said, I know who would be an example of a person that would reside in that quadrant. Ford. Said he didn't really invent anything, but he developed things that had some utility. The assembly line, and so there was this kind of assembly line development that happened. He didn't invent the car, but he made cars more prevalent and more affordable. So we've been sort of discussing this, as a bit of a continuum. And that's sort of the way I think of it now, as a continuum. The other point I will make that's different from what Donald Stokes talked about Pasteur's quadrant as kind of the ideal, and that Pasteur typified somebody who was a basic researcher and an inventor at the same time. And it really didn't happen at the same time. And, and the point I was trying to make now is that they don't have to happen at the same time. And it typically, you can develop some knowledge, and that leads to an invention, and an invention can lead to more knowledge, and more knowledge leads to another invention. And and then somewhere along the way, you solve problems, or you could have a problem for which you invent something to address. Oh, okay.
That's a
I'm
great
just
answer.
looking at
You do
Victor
have the
Rogers.
third axis, which is time, right? So I think that's a
Yes.
good answer.
So that's what we were talking about, time. And over time, actually, you just kind of, there's this fluid dynamic that over time, and over time, there is motion among these various quadrants, and transformations result from that.
Yeah.
That's sort of the way I see it.
And
Now, if
Ford
you
is a
have
good
somebody
example, right?
who is trained to both discover and invent, and that occurs in the same mind. And in that case, while Pasteur did not discover and invent at the same time, those two things did happen in the same mind. If you read the history of vaccines, he was initially trying to prove that infections were not spontaneous. There was this theory of spontaneous generation. So he did these microbiology experiments to show that bacteria coming from the air really did cause infections. And then down the stream, he discovered that if you had somebody infected by a weakened strain of bacteria, they would recover. And that if you reinfected them, they didn't get infected. And then he goes, there's something going on here. And then that's where the idea of the vaccine came from. So I think that Stokes is right that connection was made in the same brain, but the time dimension and the time domain was left out.
Great, thank you. I would like to invite Dr. Xu Chen to make quick comments and ask questions.
First, I want to thank Rod for your very kind remarks. Really don't deserve such kind remarks. And also, Bruce, thank you very much also. And I was really impressed by your superb talk, outlining so much marvelous advance in the field, anywhere from microneedle patch to sepsis stratification, blood pressure measurement, and targeted serotronics, many more. It's really impressive. Now you're the School of EngMed you're heading. This is also very impressive. I wonder what kind of engineering prerequisites do you have for the students to enter, and how is the admission ratio between the applicants and admission and attendance for these students?
So those are good practical questions, Xu. And I just one more comment. I just have to say, you truly are an inspiration to all of us. Not only for what you did, but the way you live your life and your continued activity in this community over multiple decades is just inspiring. So to answer your question, the requirement is that all of our applicants have a bachelor's, although some have a bachelor's and some have a master's. And we even have one student already at a PhD in engineering or computer science or equivalent experience, because we are trying to train problem solvers. And one other distinctive feature of our school and our program that I didn't mention is that each student is required to invent a solution to a healthcare problem or challenge. So to meet this requirement, and I would say that requirement is there, by the way, because of what we are trying to achieve. And we're trying to achieve developing medical problem solvers and inventors. So rather than just have that as an aspirational goal, we actually anchor that goal by requiring the students to invent a solution. So the background is sort of a tinkerer's, developer's, inventor's mind. We look for that in our interview process. And the requirement is that the students have this technical background, classically engineering, although we have a few students who were not undergraduate engineers, but have equivalent types of experiences. As regards the ratio of students, well, having engineering as a prerequisite does reduce the applicant pool a bit. In fact, we looked at sort of nationwide, the number of applicants to medical schools who have engineering degrees is only about 5% currently. So about 5% of applicants have an engineering undergraduate degree. So by that measure, then, I think those qualified for our program is a bit small. I'm in close contact with Carl, Illinois. We talk regularly. They have a large applicant pool, but I don't think that they require an undergraduate degree in engineering, but I'm not sure of that.
Thank you. We have to get to a few questions in the Q&A. I try to combine them because of we don't have much time. So first question from Professor Jing Wang from UC Davis. I think you addressed this question before. Maybe see whether you can have anything to add. Whether you have any advice on the more effective education of future generation of in medical and innovation for all levels, undergrad, grad, and medical students, or even fellows?
Well, I think I just gave about an hour's worth of advice. Yeah. You know, I would just repeat it again, other than to say it's a great field, fantastic opportunity to make a difference for a lot of people on this planet, is what I'm trying to say, worldwide, you know, and for generations to come through our education. For those of us who are educators, the way I think of this is that through training this new generation to have this kind of problem-solving mindset and to appreciate the interplay, the natural interplay between engineering and biology, and there is. We have the opportunity to really transform how science and problem-solving is executed in the future. And as one person actually said, you know, through our education and through our teaching, actually touch eternity.
Eric Wang has a similar question on education. Well, just give that because I already addressed it. Next question is about the great needs for the future technologies. And there are barriers in countries where they don't have the way to deliver diagnosis or care who need the most. So how can we address this issue and break the barrier and deliver all of these innovative therapies?
Yeah, well, this, you know, I generally say this is a big problem. It hasn't been solved. I mean, people who recognize it, it's going to take a while. It's going to take some time to solve it. But we really do need to get at it. And I was trying to make the point that as we go forward, we have to consciously think about underserved communities and populations and develop approaches that actually will be functional in those. In the past, we you know, we, myself included, have really focused on how we can achieve more of what we're doing, more resolution, a better technique, faster. But we also need to think about simpler, and can it be used by people other than those directly in our communities and in the big cities, even in this country? So that's basically my answer. I'm reiterating points I made previously.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Song.
the last question is from Melanie Ferreira Ortiga. And there was a concern about whether people will accept the new technologies, and some people may be used to the old ones. Do you see that could be a potential barrier as well?
Well, there's always a challenge like that, even among professionals. Often they get comfortable with with the technology they grew up with, and are slow to adapt to new technologies. So that isn't new, and I think that's just human nature. So it probably isn't likely to change, but it shouldn't dissuade anyone from trying to advance technology. Certainly doesn't dissuade me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pettigrew, for this wonderful seminar. Now back to Scott for the final announcement.
Well, you certainly met the criteria of being a leading thinker and showing future trends. You definitely fulfilled your assignment. Thank you so much, Rod. The next speaker is going to be Viviana Gradinuru, and that's going to be in February. We skip the odd months, we do the even months, and I hope everybody can tune in again. Thank you so much. I think these discussions are going to, of course, we're going to have this available for wide distribution. And I think these discussions, especially where you have both, Bruce and you, Rod, giving us your views on these things, is really going to guide where bioengineering is going in the future. And thanks so much.
Thank you.